One of the significant characteristics of underdevelopment is the absence of a good road network. This cuts across all African nations south of the Sahara. Therefore, since attaining independence, if any aspect has been delayed and hindered economic and social development in southern Cameroon, it's the unavailability of a route network. If the situation was terrible during the struggle for independence, it was worse in most parts after attaining independence and subsequently uniting with La République du Cameroun. That's because, at the time of independence, the Kumba-Manf road was tarred. But in 1972, after President Amadou Ahidjo, with the French connivance, annulled the United Nations-approved Federation for Cameroon, the president announced a series of projects, one of which was to construct roads and link the hinterland to the main cities. In 1974, the purported construction began with tracing new routes and digging up tar and asphalt on the Kumba-Manf road. After the completion of the first phase, to the surprise of villagers and everyone who anticipated a new economic era, the project was abandoned. All equipment and machinery were later taken away, leaving the Kumba-Manf road in the most desperate stage. What happened over those years can only be understood 50 years after President Paul Biya's admittance on January 21, 2021, interview with Mo Ibrahim that La République du Cameroun's objectives had been to absorb southern Cameroon completely. However, those attempts have failed. Welcome to the 5th episode of Storytelling on the CA Network on YouTube. Join us every Friday at 5 p.m. as we recount life experiences from an unpublished manuscript, The Driver. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe, comment, and share as we walk the journey of bringing to life past experiences. And ensure you go back to the last episodes to be up to date with the whole story. No truck can have smooth sailing when plying a muddy road for a long time. That's precisely the situation Smith found himself in a few minutes after exchanging words with Try Yourself. The enthusiasm with which he spoke to Try Yourself and the hopes of reaching Kumba in broad daylight encountered the reality of what it meant to be a Cameroonian. The vehicle entered mud and potholes from one village to another, and passengers jumped down and pushed. Smith was surprised at the stage of the road. He had never been to Kumba. He knew the road was terrible due to the rainy season but didn't expect to see it so neglected. Why didn't anyone tell me? Smith questioned and murmured within repeatedly. Don't tell me this is the road you people use to get to Kumba daily? Looking at somebody behind him, probably searching for an explanation. This is what they call underdevelopment, one stretch of road since the colonial period. No diversion, no alternative route or traveling means. The road is one of our significant plights. You cannot stop activities because the road is terrible. This will have an impact on your business. I am uncertain if we will be able to reach Kumba today. Should we, then God is really with us. The Mbakwa Soup Hill, you must know, is still ahead. It lies there dormant, waiting to torment us, Akabe, one of the passengers, replied. Yes, sure Hill, repeated Smith. Smith asked, so it is still in its usual lousy stage? Stories about the Mbakwa Soup Hill with a concealed waterfall were as old as the Ngo dynasty. The most attractive, exciting, and spiritual horror fables were told using that hill. I don't know who hasn't spent the night by the hill, so I'd rather shut my mouth and wait for you to live the experience with the horrible stage of the road. Akabe said. Stories about this road and the hill are endless. What's worrisome is the level of stagnation in our communities. However, the weather conditions and seasons of the year create a variation. Therefore, the situation is not always the same. My memories of a tarred road, our childhood experience in Catholic school Kokobuma, Smith replied. In that case, you can live the experience again when you travel past Kumba going towards Douala because, as we speak, the city of Kumba is as marshy and muddy as this road full of potholes, Akabe replied. Smith took a deep breath and said the thinking that the road had tar before and after attaining independence, and not a trace of it is visible now, is the worst bargaining experience ever imagined. Well, the Germans dug and constructed the road. The British didn't add a kilometer, nor did they maintain it. Uniting La République, the unmaintained road was depleted entirely and now has become a political factor unsuitable for discussion. Akabe summarized the fate of the road and its users. The discussion abruptly stopped. Smith became more terrified at the approach of the hill. He pshawed and thought deeply, reflecting on the stories he heard from his grandfather's brother, Grandpa Patrick, and the villagers, some of whose parents lived and worked as laborers while constructing the road. According to Grandpa Patrick, who was also an overseer during the construction, about 2 to 5 people died each week. Either a loose rock hit them, or they fell in one of the valleys in an attempt to escape a falling tree and rock. The increase in death rate was partly due to equipment and working tools and materials used were local. They included but were not limited to pickaxes, shovels, and spades, which often made the work wrench, tedious hearing, and strength-consuming. The German implementation of forced labor made matters worse. He said they spent 2 years digging the almost 2-mile hill. It had 7 bends at its completion. In each turn, there was a steep valley by the side and a large mass of hard rocks on the opposite side, which made the sight of hill more dangerous and terrifying. When the digging was over, including the road construction as a whole, after every week, fewer than 2 vehicles had accidents. Rather than attributing the cause of these accidents to the nature of the hill and the poor construction, the casualties were instead attributed to superstitious beliefs. People alleged the gods of the hill were annoyed and thus did this in revenge because their shrines had been destroyed. Regarding this continued occurrence of accidents, the government considered alternative measures to the road. Central was to divert the road. The thought of diverting the road started when the Germans surveyed it and found that the nature of the hill and its mysterious stories would be excessive in workforce and resources. The Germans had considered using their initial foot and horse path, called the German Road, through Bekasi and Baisasi villages. Diverting the road meant crossing the river Mongo twice to link the road. If this happened, Mbakwa-Soup, Kumbe, 1, and possibly Kokobuma and Ekol would be left out. Despite the terrifying topography, it's hard to understand why the German engineers still gave up relatively accessible land and favorable roads they had used for years. The only minor hindrance was the construction of the 2 short bridges over the river Mungo. However, there were spurious and superstitious side stories associated with why the Germans preferred to abandon their horse and footpath road instead of turning it into a motorable road. It was alleged that during the slave trade and intertribal wars, the Bekasi people planted herbs and made sacrifices on the roads while escaping into their new villages and hiding places to prevent the enslavers from reaching them. This explains why, even after the slave trade ended, the succession of colonial masters that followed were reluctant to develop the areas in question. Whether this is true or not, even with its vast population and agricultural potential, no Bekasi village across the river Mungo has a fully functional road. No sooner had he finished to think and run over the startling story, which seemed to be tales, not a downright account of incidents, they entered the steepest bent of the 7. Smith closed his eyes, avoiding looking down the valley, thinking he could get out of the vehicle and dump himself in one of the valleys. When the vehicle swayed on a concave bend facing part of the hill directly, he thought the vehicle would hit the hill. He would hold his seat firmly and, after the curve, took a deep breath, waiting for the next. Then, at the foot of the hill, SMOG met a line of vehicles stuck to the mud, and a vast gully developed due to the rain. Most trucks and lorries had an exchange of passengers and returned to Kakumba, while those from Mamf did the same. As darkness approached faster, it became impossible and dangerous for the passengers to reach Mbakwa-Soup village, a distance of about 2 miles. All passengers went to their seats in dismay to catch some sleep if possible. Smith's heart pounded. I wished he had not embarked on that journey, he told himself. He nevertheless took solace from other passengers' behavior, who remained calm and proved not to worry about the situation at stake. As a first-time traveler, he thought of his life, which was in danger, almost entangled. Besides, he was hungry, He wished he had eaten much of the fufu and eru in the morning at the Moto Park. Do I have any justification for leaving school? What shall I say brought me here if something uncalled for happens? They say man controls his destiny. Is this how I handle mine? Noise of frogs, bats, and crickets increased as the dead of the night approached. However, around 3 a.m., Smith fell asleep, and before he heard the sounds of birds, a caterpillar pulled over and began lifting vehicle. That was about 5:30 a.m. One of the vehicles had 3 punctured tires. The passengers were provided a chance in other vehicles. Among the vehicles that went to and from, hardly any women were in them. The reason was not difficult to deduce. The stress of pushing a car, the uncertainty of reaching your destination, and other unforeseen situations that came with the terrible road conditions frightened most women. After almost an hour of wait, every vehicle was pulled out, including SMOG, and they didn't take long to get to Combone Bridge. One of the significant characteristics of the Ngo dynasty of the Bantu people was the emergence of several clans that developed into tribes and languages and spread throughout what is known today as southern Cameroon, with the central contraction in the southwest. Like in all Bantu cultures, before slavery began, the topography or environment was strongly tied to the people's culture. Rivers, mountains, hills, and principal physical features profoundly affected the people. Despite tracing the exact origin from one village or community to another, it's unsurprising that people speak differently, with some distinct cultural variation from one village to another. This is typical with the villages along the Kumba Mamp Road, with an intertwined mixture of tribes. So, when the colonial masters began transforming these environments to fit and accommodate their agenda, they met various obstacles tied to the people's traditions and cultures. According to reports, constructing a bridge over the Combone River constituted a significant obstacle to the Germans. Upon crossing the bridge, Akabe turned to Smith and asked, "Did you hear that crackle gong sound? And noticed how we galloped like an antelope loping on a cocoyam farm?" "I did, and my heart even pounded," Smith replied. "Thank you for taking note. That was the white man's strategy to dispel witchcraft from this spot." According to accounts, they constructed the bridge relatively quickly and successfully during the day. Still, the next morning, everything was always met ramshackle, some taken away by the river. Even when it did not rain, the river overflowed its banks, more so the work was being done during the dry season. The German engineers pondered over this wastage and a defeat to their technology and technical know-how and warned the Combone indigenes because they knew this was not ordinary. However, their warnings got a negative reply. Even the pillars, which were not usually touched, were pulled off. Hence, they abandoned the project for almost a month. When they resumed construction, this time, the bridge stood untouched. The result was that many indigenes lost their lives. After the construction, it was reported that the chief engineer also died. And as revenge for constructing the bridge and contributing to the death of many people, the river had a trench connected to the chief's compound. Consequently, vehicles full of goods constantly fell, and missing goods appeared in the chief's yard. Smith laughed and asked, "Do you want me to believe everything you said?" "No, don't believe it because it didn't happen in River Jordan or because Mungo Park, the German explorer, didn't say it. Someone who came from nowhere, and we named our main river after him." Every passenger stared at Akabe. They all laughed. "If this is true, I will have to believe what Grandpa Patrick told us when we were kids upon hearing that Americans went to the moon. He said they have been to the moon repeatedly and found nothing, so Americans won't find anything useful." Back home, Ibuda was loitering around the yard in anticipation of his mother's arrival, who went to the farm, and her father returned from Miti. Mama Sarah returned early with the hope of meeting her husband at home. Ibuda ran to the door upon hearing her mother's footsteps. "It seems your father is not back," Mama Sarah said. "Mama, welcome back. If Papa was back, you should have met him at home. His delay confirms Mr. Try-Yourself information. Smith is not in school, which is terrible for Papa's health, the Buddha added. That's why they say in life, it's hard to anticipate the direction a problem will come from. Who knew Smith could abandon school? Mama Sarah said. Smith would hasten my husband's death, I'm seeing it coming. They entered the kitchen to prepare the evening meal. Pa Asume entered his house like a humiliated warrior from a battlefield, and hours later, his wife and daughter greeted him, but he didn't answer their greetings.